This is the Lumix 14 to 28mm ultra wide angle macro lens, and it covers a whole range of situations, whether you're into vlogging, real estate photography and videography, or maybe you just like being creative with lots of different creative wide angle angles. This lens has you covered for all of that and more. So let's just get the specs out of the way first. It obviously has a focal range of 14 to 28mm, so there is a little bit of flexibility in there to be able to go out and capture lots of different styles of images with this lens, all the way from the ultra wide angle at 14mm to the still fairly wide angle at 28mm. There's not going to be the same range as maybe a 16 to 35 would have, but there is still flexibility to go out and capture lots of different things with this lens. It has a variable aperture of f4 to 5.6, so I'm going to come on to talk about this a little bit later, because a variable aperture is something I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. Size and weight wise, it weighs 345 grams, and it's not that much bigger than a lot of the other Lumix S primes, which are all actually the same size. This is slightly bigger. Around the focus ring here it's slightly wider, which means it does have a bigger filter thread size of 77mm instead of 67mm like all of the S primes and the 20 to 60mm. But it does also zoom in and out internally as well, so if you're going to use it on a gimbal for real estate videography, for example, you can zoom in and out and not have to rebalance your gimbal. Now, I keep mentioning real estate photography and videography because that is actually what I do most of day to day. That is my job outside of YouTube, and this is the lens that I use for all of that. When you are shooting real estate, you want something that shows off a space and makes it look as big and bright and spacious as you possibly can. 14mm is perfect for that because you can stick it in the corner of a room and it almost makes the room look bigger than it actually is, which is perfect because it looks great on brochures and websites when people are looking for new properties. And also when you're shooting real estate, you want as much of the scene to be in focus as you possibly can to make it look as sharp and show as much detail as possible. So for that reason, typically you're shooting at f11. So the fact this starts at f4 isn't going to be an issue because my aperture is pretty much always going to be at f11 when I'm using this lens, and I'm just going to be messing around with my shutter speed to get the correct exposure. Hello, it's me. I just wanted to jump in while I'm editing this video to let you know that all of the presets that I have used to edit the photos in this video are available on my website for download if you want to go and check them out, including my brand new home Lightroom preset pack that I use to edit all of my real estate stuff. So go and check them out if you want to, and if you sign up to my newsletter, you will also receive 2 more presets completely for free. So the link is down in the description below. Go and have a look, and let's get back to the video. One thing that I have actually noticed with a lot of other wide angle lenses, especially in high dynamic scenes, so maybe you've got the sun shining through a window and it's quite dark in one corner of a room, when you're trying to balance the exposure, you can often get almost like a ghosting flare effect around the edge of windows. You don't get any of that with this. It's still incredibly sharp, and when you're pointing it directly into the sun, because sometimes you have to when you're doing real estate photography because the house is behind the sun, because the sun is behind the house, not the house. That wouldn't be possible. This handles flares really well, and you're not going to get any exaggerating flares that are going to be really difficult to remove if you have to. It handles all of that absolutely perfect. If you're into vlogging, I think this lens is actually pretty much perfect for that because it is pretty small. It's smaller than 16 to 35s tend to be. They tend to be a little bit longer, which means that if you were to pair it with the 16 to 35mm, I've got the 45mm Sigma on here at the moment, but if I pop the 14mm on here, this is still a very small compact vlogging setup. You can walk around with this vlogging, capturing what you want to, and you're not going to draw too much attention to yourself while you are doing that because it is still very small and compact, and it's nice and light as well. Even if you were to add a small little shotgun microphone on top of this, it's not going to add too much size to this. So this is pretty much perfect for that. It's really light as well. I think on the S9 this whole setup weighs probably around about 700 grams, so it's not going to weigh you down if you had this in your bag and you're carrying it around with you every day. I think this is actually pretty much the perfect travel vlogging setup. I tend to keep the Sigma 45mm 2.8 prime on my S9 like I mentioned because I'm into that sort of photography, But if I was a travel vlogger and things like that, I think I'd probably use the 14 to 28mm on the S9 most of the time. And I think I'd probably choose this over the 20 to 60mm purely because of the extra width at 14mm instead of 20mm, which when you are vlogging is brilliant because it makes you look a little bit smaller in the scene, which is why a wider angle lens is perfect for that. Right, variable aperture. This is often quite a big talking point because you are often told that a variable aperture lens isn't as good as a lens with a fixed aperture. So in that sense, with this having a variable f4 to 5.6 aperture, why don't I choose something like the Sigma 16 to 28mm, which pretty much the same focal length apart from the 2mm at the wide end. But why don't I choose that Sigma, which has a fixed aperture of f2.8 over the lumix with a variable aperture? And there's a few reasons for it. One is because most of the stuff I shoot is real estate photography. So as I mentioned before, I'm shooting wide angle photos with as deep a depth of field as I can at f11, and I'm only changing my shutter speed to capture the amount of light that I need. So for that reason, f2.8 on the Sigma 16 to 28mm isn't something that I actually need. And the extra 2mm of reach on the focal length is something that I find very useful because it does actually make quite a big difference at the wide end of the focal range, those 2mm. It doesn't at the telephoto end of the focal range, but 14 to 16mm does actually make quite a big difference. For most of the things as well, f4 offers plenty of depth of field and captures plenty of light as well. And it's very rare that if you were recording a video clip that you're going to be zooming in as you're filming a clip. Typically, if you were going to change focal length, you wouldn't be recording. So you'd then double check your settings anyway, or add a little bit of extra light from a light source if you needed to, or just boost your ISO a little bit, because the difference in the amount of light that it's capturing at f4 to 5.6 really isn't that much, so it's not anything that you need to worry about. One of my favourite things about this lens is its macro capabilities. Now, it's not true one-to-one life-size macro, it is half-life macro, but it is still so much fun to use, and it allows you to be really creative and experiment with different things that you might not necessarily have thought about. And that's because this lens has a close focus distance of 15 centimeters. And when you have a close focus distance, that means from the subject to the actual camera sensor. So that's not the distance from the front of the lens to the subject, it's the subject to the sensor. And with this lens not being far off 15 centimeters, you can get really close, almost touching the front of the lens to your subject, and that just allows for so much creativity, and you can really change up your entire point of view and capture some genuinely striking, stunning images that look so different to anything else out there. And when you are shooting that close to your subject as well, f4 is actually a really shallow depth of field, which means that you can get some really blurry backgrounds on an ultra wide angle lens shooting at f4. It's a lot of fun to use, and that just makes it so versatile and means you can use it for a whole bunch of different things. So this lens covers all use cases. Maybe you just want something affordable that you can vlog with, travel with, capture memories with. Maybe you want to experiment with creative wide angle photography, and it even covers all of your professional use cases, like for me with my real estate photography. It is a brilliant little lens that I would highly recommend having in your camera bag. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like what you see on the channel as well, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video. Ow, why did I do that?